Welcome to the American Intelligence Media. I am your host, Thomas Paine, also known as Douglas Gabriel. And today we're continuing in a beautiful series that we're doing so that you can become awakened. It is called New World Awakening. In a way, what we're planning is the series that is going to show you how to realize where you're at, get control of where you're at so that you understand how to discern all the falsehoods and the lies that are streaming in towards you, get control of your own conscious action, and then ascend. Go through a process, but in the end, get to the point where you can actually not be affected by anything in the outside world, and where you can then become even more effective in the outside world than you can possibly imagine. That is by aligning yourself with intuition. The first in this series was about revolution, and we pointed out that if you were standing still, you're going backwards. You need to find your place in this revolution, whether it be the revolution in medicine, it might be affecting your health, in education, in geopolitics, in the fear that arises from geopolitics, in the bombardment of 4 and 5G radiation coming into your body. Wherever the revolution is for you, you need to find where you're at in it and make your stand. Today, we're going to talk about what happens once you do come to that self-knowledge. And a quick reference last time was made to having a worldview. When you get self-knowledge, if you do not have a worldview, what are you going to do with it anyway? You need to awaken, but awaken to what? What is it that you're awakening to? So the first thing that we recommend, of course, is to get a cosmology, what we call as a cosmology. And that's what a revolution is. You look around and you see everything for what it is. You discern what it is, and you find your place in it. And hopefully in the end, in your revolution, whatever it is, you find the past, the present, and the future. How you relate to the past, the present, and the future. You find how your different aspects of your soul relate to those elements in time. And when you can understand where you came from and where you're going and what the goal is, then you have awakened. It is not a comfortable feeling. It is the feeling of knowing that you're in a revolution and that it does come down to you to sound the alarm. It's the feeling that there are only a few of you, as we described last time, that might be in that revolution, and yet you're going to affect the whole world. So we have to understand the importance of the individual and the importance of consciousness. So when we take the second step towards the new world awakening, we take a step towards what we call apocalypse or apocalyptic times. I don't think anyone listening to this, whether you're a Christian or not, or whether you've ever had any association with the Bible and the book of Revelations by St. John the Divine, the book we call the Apocalypse, I'm certain that if you're hearing my voice, that you know that we are in apocalyptic times and that the fears and the beasts, the 7-headed beast with the 10 horns, the 2-horned beast, the whore of Babylon, the vials and the bowls and the horns and the trumpets and all these horrible things from the apocalypse you probably have heard and you've been told this is the time we're in. And so they point at kind of a very bad part of that book called The War of All Against All and say that we are in that war of all against all. That is true. In terms of your thinking, in terms of your feeling, in terms of your will, we are in the war of all against all. And I'm going to explain why that happens because it has a direct impact upon what apocalypse really means and what an apocalypse brings as a revelation. But as we look into our lives, are you in an apocalyptic moment? Do you need a revelation? Do you need a communication with the divine that tells you that you're in the right place, that you're doing the right thing? That's what an apocalypse is. But in the old days, in the days of, say, the Hebrew prophets, there was the king and the prophet. The king could rule the country only with the help of the prophet. And the prophet had to go through great renunciation, fasting, preparation, oblations, oblations, all these different preparations that the prophet had to go through to prepare themselves so that they could then interpret what would be called dreams or visions or what it was that the king, for instance, with Daniel, King Nebuchadnezzar, wanted to know, what does this dream mean? Or with the Pharaoh, he asked Joseph, what does the dream mean? They couldn't understand the dream. So it was the prophet who who was able to go into the unseen world because they had prepared to do so, see what it was that was actually being said by the spiritual world and given to the king, so that then the kingdom could be ruled properly. Well, that's a huge responsibility, it seems, for the prophet. But we know how it's done. We know the signposts. We know the images. We know the symbols. We know the path. And so in the second volume of the Gospel of Sophia, A Modern Path of Initiation, it is explained there in great detail exactly how you can look at the Apocalypse and go and study the Old Testament view from Daniel to Ezekiel to Elijah, and to other, of course, to St. John the Divine in the New Testament. So as we look at those just in that particular tradition, we can get a wealth of information that helps us realize what will come when we approach that unseen world. And this is probably the biggest message that we're bringing to you today is, in the olden times, whether it be Hercules or Aeneas or Mercury or Theseus or Psyche, all the great heroes of the Greeks had to go into the underworld. They had to go into that unseen world, and they had to know the path. They had to face the three-headed dog. They had to have the coin on their mouth to get across the river Styx. They had to not go to sleep as they crossed that river. And then they had to keep their mission in mind and make sure not to eat any of the food in the underworld. And they would come back up, and some would accomplish their mission and some would not. That was the old path. So as we look at that cave and the entrance into the cave, into the underworld of the Greeks, we don't need to do that anymore. We don't need what was then an entire school of mystery teaching. And in those mystery schools, whether it be of Aloysius, whether it be the Kabiri mysteries, the Samothracian mysteries, the mysteries of Dodona, the 7 different mysteries that surrounded Athens were all different approaches to that threshold of the unseen world. And when they got there, they had to have prepared themselves, the people who became the initiates. To become an initiate in the mystery wisdom, in the mystery schools, you had to prepare yourself for years and years, and then you had one great revelation during the experience that then lasted the rest of your life. Well, that is exactly what the writer of Apocalypse tells us. That's exactly what Daniel tells us. And of course, Daniel is more than just the story of Daniel, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But what is it that they experienced? They came to that threshold of the unseen. They went into the underworld. They had a revelation. They communicated with the gods in the underworld. They came back, and from this transcendental experience, they connected their own I am, their own ego consciousness, with the ability to go across that threshold to the unseen. We call that the threshold between the physical world and the spiritual world, or between the seen and the unseen. Now, no matter what path of spirituality you follow, or if you follow none, what I'm telling you is also seen in psychology. It's seen in everything that you can imagine, from all literature. If you look closely, you'll see that it's a dance with the question of, how do I cross that threshold into the unseen and find out where I go at night, what I do there, why I sleep, why I dream, and where I go after I die. And also, if one gets very curious, one could say, and if I followed a spiritual path, the path of the prophet or the path of the initiate or the path of the teacher, so many different spiritual paths you could follow. They'll all lead to the same question, believe it or not. They'll all lead to one question, and that question is, are we going to live after death? Almost all the mystery initiation schools taught a way to understand that you live beyond death, and that we came from someplace before we were born. Now, this is the shocking news, and this is where perhaps some of our listeners may need to stand back and ask themselves the question, do I really want to step across into a conversation about the unseen? Who tells us about the unseen? How do I know it's true? Someone's telling me about what happens after death? Well, who says so? Well, as we know, now literally hundreds of people have had near-death experiences. They come back and they give you very similar stories, don't they? Oh, and those stories happen to directly link to what The Tibetan Book of the Dead tells you you're going to experience after death. Or the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Or the rites of death that are read so that the person in a Catholic church will meet the host of angels. All the different paths, for instance, the secret rites of the Masons, were all focused on one question. How do you raise the Master Mason from death into life again? That's the fear that we all have. As we approach the unseen, we have to face fear, doubt, and hatred. And if you have not resolved fear, doubt, and hatred in yourself, and you get there, the Masons say that becomes the three ruffians. That becomes these three ruffians who are upstart, and they want a higher degree, and they want more money, and so they kill the Master Mason, which is really who? Their higher self. So whether it be Dorothy and her three companions on the yellow brick road, whether it be the magic flute, whether it be the Masonic initiations, they're all going to tell you that there's something in the unseen, and that you, the Master Mason, or whatever you want to call yourself, have three parts to yourself. You're thinking, you're feeling, and you're willing. And the problem is, the modern person doesn't even know they have these three parts, and so they're going three directions at one time, or more. If you ask somebody, how do you feel, and they tell you how they think, you'll notice that they really didn't even understand the question. Or you ask them how they feel, and they're going to tell you what they're going to do. Because they actually do not integrate. Because of our modern world moving at such a pace, we do not integrate thinking, feeling, and willing into one coherent being that we would call your I am, your ego consciousness, which then can cross this rainbow bridge that is described in also most religions. Once you cross the rainbow bridge, what do? You communicate with those who have died, you communicate with higher spiritual beings. In the apocalypse, you receive a scroll, you receive a book. Daniel was told to write it down. Anyone who has a true apocalypse and goes through those same archetypal cosmic images, the fires, the winds, the whirlwind, the seven stands, the 24 elders, the throne, the Lamb upon the throne, New Jerusalem descending, no matter how you want to describe it, in all the different world religions, and I have a degree in comparative religion, so I speak from experience, you'll find the same golden thread going through. People want to know, was there life before birth? Is there life after death? And what is it like in the spiritual world? Because they're afraid. They have doubts, and they know that their hatred can hold them back from any spiritual advancement. So when you reach that threshold of the unseen world, fear, doubt, and hatred loom up. That's your own fear, doubt, and hatred. Those are the ugly visages of yourself that wish to scare you, to wake you up, to say, why are you trying to bring this non-virtuous activity into the virtuous world that you go into when you sleep or when you die? Because it's the same world. It's not the underworld of the Greeks. It's a different world altogether. And we're awakening to that. And for those who actually can come to that threshold and get across it with their thinking, feeling, and willing combined together, they have a chance to get what all the stories say you're going to get. The tree of life, whether it be in New Jerusalem and the tree of life with the 4 rivers flowing out from it, whether it be Gilgamesh going to his ancient, kind of like his Noah figure, his ancient grandfather to say, I want the tree of life. And so Gilgamesh attained the tree of life, but he couldn't keep it. How did he attain it? First, what did Utnapishtim say to him? Utnapishtim was Gilgamesh's ancient, kind of like the Ancient of Days for Gilgamesh. He has to cross the ocean, go across the mountains, go through incredible trials to finally get there. And Utnapishtim says, oh yeah, sure, I'll give you the tree of life. It's no problem. Stay awake for 3 days. And Gilgamesh, who just went through all these trials, which I won't tell you about, but same trials you're going through in your own life, archetypally speaking, Gilgamesh immediately goes to sleep. And so Utnapishtim tells him, I can't give you the tree of life, but I can tell you where it is. It's at the bottom of the ocean. So he ties rocks to himself, goes down, gets the tree of life. It's really just a little plant. Brings it back, And he can't really accomplish his task, which was out of his love for his friend Enkidu. Gilgamesh wanted the Tree of Life to save his life and to know that he would himself, because now he was terrified because he didn't know where his friend went when his friend died. Is this not the path of all human beings? Who can give you the answer? What happens after you die? It's actually very, very simple. Your sleep is a small death. Your dreams are a digestion of all that you do here, but they're a higher digestion of it. But if you could become awake in your dreams, and if you could cross that threshold into the world where living images come like in dream, but you could control them, that's what we're talking about. That's what the apocalypse is for the person who is prepared. For the person who's not prepared, it's the three-headed dog of hell, Cerberus, who scares you with your own fear, doubt, and hatred in a way that no one else can. So the question is, are you going to awake? Some will have to say, oh, well, no, I might not want to awaken, because self-knowledge is terrifying. And you cannot carry the weight of this world across that threshold to the unseen. Now, you may think it's nonsense to make reference to this, but let me make very clear to you. No one has ever seen electricity. They've never seen light. Water itself is invisible. Most gravity, invisible. Electromagnetism, electrostatic energy, almost all the forces that the scientists tell you they can explain are invisible and still unknown. What we can do is utilize the forces behind them. But what we forgot is the beings who were behind them before those forces arose. And that's what I'm talking about. That's what we're trying to help you awaken unto. You can awaken unto your fear, doubt, and hatred. But if you conquer that, you can get across the threshold and you can have an apocalyptic experience that brings revelation that every person who has the authentic experience then becomes an initiate. Sometimes it happens very quickly. Sometimes you have to prepare, as I said. But once you have that experience, every single person who has that experience, and so you'll know if you have the experience that I'm talking about, if you can stay awake for 3 days and get across that threshold, and you can keep your thinking, feeling, and willing bound as one coherently, you're going to have one really giant desire. And that's what is told in all the apocalypses. To witness, first off, and if you can witness and remember, then you must write it down and share it with everyone so that they too will know the truth of the matter. So this is what we're trying to bring to you today. That previously, waking in a revolution, in all the revolutions, you have to get self-knowledge and get control of yourself. But as you approach that threshold, it's a scary deal, and it's a choice that you're going to have to make. And the reason you have to make it is the following. And I saved kind of the best part of the opening general phrasing here for the end. And that's that you have no choice. Just like the revolutions that are around us, you have no choice. This is not the war of all against all. It is not the end, but it is an apocalyptic time. And we must face those apocalyptic images, whether we like it or not. We must evolve. We're not allowed to be a person who stands still and actually moves backwards. We must face the threshold because of the following. As soon as we invented weapons that could destroy everything that we know of in the known world, a threshold was crossed collectively for humanity. We reached a point where humanity had to say, in the hands of some people we don't know, some unseen people, are some human forces that can destroy everything. Now, we see that through our own electronic devices, our own medicines, iatrogenic death, death by doctors. We see it in the tools that we work with. We see it in the poisons that we eat. We see it in everything we drink with high fructose corn syrup. We see it in the Monsanto GMO. We see all of these things happening, and we have to, whether we like it or not, cross the threshold I'm describing. We're being pulled across it. There's no choice. So if you feel yourself having the side effects of being pulled across the threshold, this is what it looks like. It looks like you become neurotic in your thinking. Too many choices. Too many things. Too much materialism. Too much secular humanism, as we would call it. Too many people telling you that science is true instead of science is a belief. Science is another mythology that someday will be laughed at. The science that we look at. The science we look at today discovers that the science of yesterday is a joke. Hardly any theory lasts more than 100 years, and now hardly any theory lasts more than 10 years. So all of it's theory. There is no proof of almost anything. The only proof you're going to get is that you have an I am, that you know that you exist. And you can find that inwardly, and you can find it outwardly. And when we talk about finding it outwardly, we call it the cosmos, because according to this theory, the thing that's inside is the thing that's outside, and it's one and the same, and it's separate. This goes back to the theory, the oldest theory of philosophy, from the Upanishads, from the ancient Indian Vedas. And these theories are just as sound today as they were before, philosophically, but we now must take things into the new stage of humanity's development. Humanity keeps developing, and that's the reason we have to have great new leading ideas that become new religions, what we would call leitmotifs of cultural development, new icons. People call them memes, but you'd have to connect some very deep narratives that go into the religious space where people feel reverence and wonder and awe. That's where the power is. That's not just in the neurosis of thinking. When you, in our age, use thinking properly, you can go to Google and you can look up any of the great sacred texts of all times. It's an amazing thing for a researcher like myself. I dreamt when I was a child, when I was studying comparative religions at a very early age, that I could study these things, that I could find out what the Bompo culture studied in the ancient Hunza Valley and the Gilgit valleys, or to find out, well, I could go on and on. The point is, I can now with my phone. And it makes you neurotic. We now know that they realized that the way that the internet system was created was a PSYOPs program to give you digital dopamine, to keep you neurotic, to keep you not thinking, and to keep you from remembering the last thing that they brought you and turning education into entertainment, and grotesque entertainment filled with violence and sex. Sports, some sports are violence. Sex, it was the number one thing on the internet when it was first released to people. So what we have in the brain, in thinking, or what we think is where the brain is in thinking in modern times. It's not, it's in the heart, by the way. But you have to cohere the heart with thinking before your real thinking is in the heart. That's what the Heart Math Project has proven scientifically and is true. But what they don't mention is there's a third section called your willpower. And that's the part people don't understand at all. So thinking becomes neurotic when you're pulled across the threshold and the unseen world comes at you. And the unseen world is all the technology we're using. We don't understand it, but we use it without gratitude. It becomes our life. It actually becomes who we are, because the things you do are who you are. The ritual activities of your life are what create you. That's your willpower. That's your will. And when that gets twisted in the modern age, as I say, it turns into sex and violence, but it also turns into just subsuming your will by watching television all the time, or playing video games, or taking away your willpower so that you become a couch potato, someone who just sits and does nothing, sits at your computer and does nothing, never takes a walk, doesn't use their limbs, and actually that eats your willpower. And it will draw you into thinking that you're extremely powerful if you're on the internet, by the way, because you will think that your willpower can go anywhere and do anything. It's an amazing, amazing delusion. And the illusion, of course, is that you have all knowledge. That's the neurosis. You have all knowledge and you have all power. But in the middle, if you do not have, and unfortunately, as you're pulled across the threshold, if you do not have a center, a cosmology, a worldview, if you do not have basically love and gratitude in your heart, you will not withstand the psychosis that comes into your feeling. And before you know it, you may be one of those 50, 60,000 people last year in America who died from taking opiates because of psychosis. They give you these drugs for psychosis, all these different illnesses, what we would call psychotic drugs. And what do? They, in the end, make you more ill than you were to begin with. But that's the psychosis of our age. So we have neurosis, psychosis, and the aberration of the will. And this is what happens when you're sucked across the threshold. This makes you, whether you like it, in apocalyptic times, and you better learn the signposts so that you can understand that the things that you're seeing and experiencing have been experienced by all people who have crossed the threshold into the unseen, whether they be shamans or the medicine men of the Indians, whether they be any religion you name, or whether it be the beliefs of the past. All of them wanted to know what is on the other side. Where do children come from? How is it that these souls come to us? And then how is it in the end that these beings who've now become very inspirited, when they die, where do they go? And so, what is it that you can do as you're approaching that threshold and realizing you're going to be pulled and sucked across, and your thinking and your feeling and your willing are going to be pulled into neurosis, psychosis, and aberrations of your own will? You have to learn to control the thing in the middle, your I am, that controls it all. Just like we said before with revolution, you have to find out where you are. Your own self-knowledge is going to be what carries you across. We can also look at those who have actually followed this tradition. For instance, the tradition of Daniel from the Old Testament. Daniel is not just one being. Daniel is a conglomerate of all the different prophets that have a path that proves that they are an initiate or a prophet who can then help the king. So when you hear about the fact that Daniel is oppressed, and in the end, in all these apocalyptic stories, people like to give the apocalypse a bad rap. It's not a bad rap when you read to the end of the story. In the end, Daniel and his 3 friends all they replace the king, Nebuchadnezzar, essentially. Nebuchadnezzar goes off to seek the tree of life and become the tree of life, because Daniel says, you are the tree of life. He explains what these ages, the gold, the silver, the copper, the iron are. And when he explains this to Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar has a realization and goes off to live as the tree of life, to live as the tree of life. And Daniel and his 3 companions, who have gone through this process of what a prophet, and in our next talk, we're going to point out that we are all prophets. And if we are not prophets, we had better become prophets so that we can see what is coming to us next, because things are coming so fast. And so Daniel had to go through this amazing process. And you're going to see these same symbols in all of the apocalypse, whether it be Ezekiel with his fiery wheels that have the animals and the beings who have eyes and many wings, or whether it's John the Divine, who when he sees the throne of the Ancient of Days, sees a throne with fiery wheels that have a lion, a bull, an eagle, and an angel. What are those? Those are what the person who wants to cross the threshold to the unseen world needs to get control of. Those are your 3 lower bodies. They're depicted in many different forms, but your higher body is that angel, and that's the point. The 3 lower ones are these other bodies you need to get control of, because they are thinking, feeling, and willing. And if you cannot control them and understand them through consciousness, then you're going to be pulled apart, whether it's in this world or whether it's in the other world. the unseen world where you go to sleep every night, and where you also go after you die. It's the same world. Those worlds can be described, and they're described in all religions, usually as 7 interpenetrating spheres, or a ladder of 7, or a mountain of 7 stages. And so these things are all described. What are those? Those are actually the planets in our own solar system. They are, in fact, creating resonance in our body through our own 6 organs and our heart. So the sun, our heart, and 6 organs around them are, in fact, our solar system. And so when we look at our physical body, we shouldn't be like those who say that we should discard it because it's imperfect. It is perfect in its own way, but it is evolving, and that's what is oftentimes forgotten about. So when you go through Daniel's initiation of the earth, you're actually understanding your own physical body. And then he had an initiation of water and of air and of fire. I'm sure you know the one of fire. He was thrown into the fiery pit. And no problem, he and his friends walk around, and they even see the Son of Man comes to them. An angel comes to them and walks with them and converses with them while they're in the fiery challenge that he has to go through to become a prophet. But when he completes that, the king actually makes him the minister for all the lands, and his 3 companions also. And then, as I say, he literally gives over the entire kingdom. Well, that is what an apocalypse is. An apocalypse is an uncovering of the soul of humanity, or your soul. And when you uncover it, and you break away from the gray shadow materialism, the type of thinking that is so earthbound that you can't even see your soul or what's underneath your soul. But when the apocalypse means uncovering of the soul, when you have an unveiling, an uncovering of the soul, you see your spirit. You see that not only does the soul have 3 parts, the parts I'm telling you about, thinking, feeling, and willing, but they have a higher component. When you develop the organs, literally our physical organs transform into new organs, and when you develop those new organs, you can then see into that unseen world. You can be like Daniel or John. And when you look into that world, if you understand what the archetypes are and the symbols are and your place there and how you got there, then you too can interact. As a matter of fact, after Daniel's amazing trials, these 4 trials, and understanding the physical body, and then the life body, the body that keeps your body alive, which is invisible, and then your body of desires. Another thing, you might see on someone's face their desires, but really your body of desires and your dreams are hidden to others. And then your most mysteriously hidden part of you, your ego, your I am. Where is that I am? Where is that consciousness when you're sleeping? You see, it's very mysterious. So when Daniel finally understands all of these things, what happens? He doesn't have to rise up into the heaven like John the Divine describes, or Ezekiel, or as Elijah is taken off in the fiery chariot. They don't have to describe these things. Daniel actually begins to have conversations with angels who come to him. And where do they meet him? Either at the river, which is, of course, the trial by river, which is the life body, or at the threshold to his house. So in the end, all Daniel has to do in his old age is walk to the threshold of his house and stand at the stoop of his door and look out into the world, and spiritual beings come and give him the messages that they need so that they can help the kingdom be in line, be in an alignment and be aligned with the divine world. And that's, of course, what a king is supposed to be doing. In those days, a priest king, as it were, who had a prophet to help him understand the future, who had the ability to go across that threshold. So what happens when you go across the threshold and you can come back? Do you just come back with all these negative apocalyptic images that have been impressed into our minds? No. The Apocalypse of St. John says that if you, through the judgment, are one of the chosen ones, you put on a white linen, you go underneath the throne of the Ancient of Days, and you're there witnessing as the Lion of Judah turns into the Lamb that is slain and takes on these new organs, these new sense organs, these literally these 7 eyes and these wings that the Lamb takes on, and then the Lamb goes and sits on the throne of the Ancient of Days. What an amazing thing. Here's the Lamb that is slain, defeats all of the monsters, defeats the seven-headed, ten-horned, the two-horned, the beast, all the beasts, the dragon is all defeated by a Lamb that is slain and comes back to life. That's the story of all the great mysteries and the mystery schools. It's that there's life after death, that you will go on, that though you be slain, you conquer. That is the mystery wisdom of what is called the mystery of Golgotha, what Jesus of Nazareth, became when he became Jesus Christ. It is what Buddha became. It is what Krishna became in many incarnations as he's here to come down and help human beings again and again, because they come across from the unseen into the seen world. And if we can learn the signpost, we can learn the topology of this apocalyptic world that we can go to beyond the unseen threshold, then we too can become the prophet of our own lives. We can become the prophet who wants to come back and share what they've witnessed with everyone, to write it down, and to take this book like John does and eat the book, which is good in the mouth and bitter in the stomach. What is that? That is self-knowledge. But if you look at John, yes, John, the writer of the Apocalypse, goes through all kinds of transformations in his story, but those are archetypal images that apply to today. They're the same thing that you would experience, but in your own images, in your own archetypes, in your own religious beliefs. We will all experience these beings. These are not forces anymore. When we're talking about the 24 elders, we're talking about beings. When we're talking about the images that are there, they become, in fact, tools for us to use. And in the second volume of the Gospel of Sophia, Modern Path of Initiation, many tools are given. Descriptions are made from all the different world religions on how this actually happens in your human body. And we're not saying that going into the unseen world is only going into your body. But when you go into your body, you do go into an exact replica of the cosmos. And so we give many, 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 many helps and hints and tips and tools that prepare you for the third book. Because the first book is what we talked about, a cosmology. The second book is this path. It's what you need to know. It's the tools. It's what you're going to experience, or what you are experiencing as you are pulled across the threshold, in many cases unwillingly, in almost all cases. But now, let me make this perfectly clear. Going across the threshold is a good thing. We want to go into the unseen world. We want to see the beings who are there behind these forces. We want to communicate with them. We want to learn a spiritual language. That is the mission of growing ourself into a higher self, into a bigger self, a self that isn't just selfish, but is there for everyone. So as we are telling you these things and giving you these tools in the Gospel of Sophia, they're there so that you can cross this and not be in disease, not be in stress, not be in neurosis and psychosis, not be overwhelmed by the forces in our world that seem as if they are coming in as revolutions, as apocalyptic times. We almost want you to understand that if you use these tools, you will see that apocalypse leads to revelation. It leads to a very good thing. And so the more crazy the world looks, the more apocalyptic our times are. That is actually a good sign for all of us. It means that humanity as a whole is going through what we need to spiritually, which is awaken to the fact that the physical world is actually a manifestation of an unseen world. And when we know this, we can become citizens of both, and we can learn a language. Now, that language is separate to every person. And so we offer, in the third volume of the Gospel of Sophia, a Path of Initiation. And you choose your own language. But once you have this language, it is the voices that spoke to John, the 24 elders that sit around the thrones. And John was there because the 7 lamps are lit. Those are his chakras. Those are the 7 organs. Those are the nerve ganglia. They're not just an illusion that comes out of India. These are real forces. We describe them in great detail in Volume 2, so that when these things happen, you'll understand. When you understand that inside of you are unfolding forces of the past, present, and future, and that, in fact, the only thing keeping us from seeing the past clearly and the future clearly is that we believe there's such a thing as a stream of time. For the spiritual beings beyond the threshold into the unseen world, there is no such thing as time. There's endurance, but there is no time. Time for us is a way that we understand what space is so that we can evolve, because we're not evolved perfectly yet. And as we learn to go across the threshold, it's like learning to go into your dreams and control them. Unfortunately, many people don't have dreams today. And unfortunately, those who dream don't understand what it is that's happening. And again, we explain those things so that you will have a chance to use your dreams as a preparation to know that you live after death. You live after you go to sleep. Where do you go? How is it that your memories are there coming to you from the wide world? How is it that you're able to go anywhere that you want? Why is it that you have a fluid capacity in your thinking called imagination, so that no matter what you imagine in a dream, it comes right to you? Isn't that miraculous? Things you think you've never imagined come to you. Where do they come from? You wake up with an idea that amazes you and it takes you weeks to manifest. Or let's say that in that dream, you actually hear the sounding of the angels, the archangels, the time spirits. But when you hear the sounding of the archangels, it comes as an inspiration. That inspiration across that threshold in the unseen world, whether it be in your dream, whether it be between lives, or whether it be through very concentrated spiritual meditation practices that have been used since the beginning of time, that have been passed down to us through all these sacred lineages, they all say the same thing. So if you can enter into that world and you can work with that world, then you come back with things like imagination. Your thinking becomes a higher form of thinking. You come back with inspiration, so that your feeling now may have an inspiration. As I'm sure you know, if you've had an inspiration, it only takes a second, and yet can last a lifetime. It can fill you and inspire you for a lifetime. How is that? Because it's beyond time and space. One inspiration has driven a person for their entire life to create magnificent things. One inspiration. But even deeper than that, because those are your feelings when you're across the threshold, even deeper than that is intuition. That is when your willpower aligns with divine willpower. Now, this is a very powerful thing. People say intuition. They may mean intuition. Intuition is known by the following. It's always correct. It's never wrong. So if you have an intuition and it's not correct or doesn't pan out, you did not have an intuition. Now, an intuition can come, as you know, from nowhere. It doesn't even come in a moment. Where does it come from? Nowhere. It comes from everywhere. It comes even faster than an inspiration. An inspiration seems to last for a second. Or an artist may paint an inspiration and take, months and months. Or a person with a camera may just get exactly the right frame, and then they're inspired, and then all of a sudden they take a step in their own development in terms of how they take pictures. But an intuition comes so fast that it is you. You don't even perceive it. It doesn't become you. It doesn't come from the past. It isn't even in the present. It's for sure tells all about the future. But as it tells about the future, it incorporates the present and the past. It has complete, perfect coherence in what we think is the stream of time. What is that? That is when the human willpower can get across into the unseen world and work with higher beings called archai, being time beings beings that we call zeitgeist, beings of our time, beings who lead for about 300, 360 years, and they lead cultural transformations. And they take a cycle every there's 7 of them, and these great time beings come and they teach us. And this has been looked at by many people, and they've written about it. Oswald Spengler wrote about the decline of the Roman Empire. He talks about this type of being. So these beings actually affect history. They're not an imagination. But when they affect you, then you become a person working for the revolution. You become a person who is called to be a prophet. You become a person who becomes initiated because you truly become a vessel for intuition. So imagination and thinking, inspiration in your feeling, and intuition in your will, that is what you get. So what we're telling you is if you learn the path, if you learn how to open yourself, you don't need anyone. You don't need a guru, you don't need a priest, you don't need anyone to mitigate your spiritual development. You need your I am. You need, like Moses had. What did he have? Nothing. He went up Mount Sinai. When he came back after his apocalypse, after his revelation, what did he have? Carved into stone, 10 rules that are still as valid today as they ever were. It distills down to what Jesus of Nazareth said. 2 rules. Love God with all your heart, your mind, and your soul. There's your Trinity again. Thinking, feeling, willing. And love your neighbor as yourself, which then defies time and space, doesn't it? Why would you love someone before you loved yourself? Why would you do that? Why would you give all 3 parts of yourself over to God? Simple rules. But when it comes down to it, it's one rule, the golden rule. Treat everyone the way you want to be treated. This is in every single religion that I have ever studied. Any true revelation says the same thing. Don't be selfish. Be selfless. Give of yourself. Use your I am to help others. Use your willpower. This incredible willpower that if you align it with intuition has astounding power. You become literally one person who might change history. Without exaggeration, remember that. One person changes history. Happens throughout all of history if you study history. One person. So it's consciousness. And that's what we're saying. When you face the threshold, if you have consciousness and you are willing to face your fears, you're willing to face the evil, you're willing to face the 3-headed dog, you're willing to face the darkness of the underworld, the threshold, you are willing to look at your own self, then you have the capacity to be that prophet. You have the capacity to understand that the intent of apocalypse is always the same. Let's take John the Divine's. After all that he goes through, what happens? He literally watches the Lamb and becomes the Lamb. Watch New Jerusalem drop from heaven, and they become wedded as one, and the tree of life is there for everyone. So what happens? You merge with your higher self. Your soul, through the uncovering of the apocalypse, the unveiling of your soul, shows you have a spirit. That spirit is New Jerusalem, Shambhala, Tushita heaven. It is whatever you want to call it. It does not matter. But it shows that you can marry your soul, the soul of this world, with that I am that survived the soul, being a soul in this world, can reach into the spiritual world, into the unseen world. And when that happens, you have a chance to merge with your higher self. But there are 3 parts to your higher self. There's 3 parts to your spirit. We won't go into that today. But that's what the person who has the true revelation finds out. And they find out these powers that they have. They find out these stages they go through. And then they learn how to work with these forces of imagination, inspiration, and intuition. They learn how to not be fearful, how to not have doubt and hatred. They learn that faith, hope, and love conquer those things, so that as they approach the threshold, they know they're going to be carried across the threshold into a loving world where they have friends that they communicate with. Not only hosts of saints and friends who have died, and all the great spiritual archetypes of the world are there, but also angels and archangels, all the hierarchy, all the way up, the 9 hierarchy are there. So what is it that you're going to get from crossing the threshold? You get the chance to see yourself, your higher self, your spiritual self. The deal is, we're still children. And when we cross the threshold, we need to build a house to live in over there. We need to begin again. We need to begin like a child. We need to begin as if we were born into another world. But fortunately, your good works, as Jesus of Nazareth told us, your good works are there. He says he has already prepared these mansions for us. There are these places to live. And so when we go there, we need to understand whether it's at night or in your meditation or in your spiritual practice, or whether it's death, that we need to have a spiritual ground upon which to stand in that world. And that's what we're trying to teach you. That's what we're going to try to teach you through this 7 series. It's called the Path of Ascension. It's called a New World Awakening. It's when you awake and you see who you are, and when you realize that, you become as powerful as any single person, any single biography that changed history. One person can change the world and may not even be known by history whatsoever. It may only be through consciousness. So what we're telling you can be applied in your life. It's not only geopolitical, it's not only that glass bead game crossover to the books that we've written that are on other sites, which is a bridge that you can find yourself, which also has to do with the identities of why it is that we have different identities that we present to the world. You can see our different books, and those books will have, in fact, tools in them that we will be talking about in all of these different programs, these different talks that we're giving. And as we give them, it is in fact a ladder. It is a ladder to what is called ascension. When John went up into heaven, they all go up. Everyone goes up. They get wings. If we take the last image I'd like to keep in your mind is the image of the Virgin clothed in the sun, with the moon at her feet and the stars about her head, and her child in her arms. And the dragon is there, and we feel that. We're all told about the dragon that is ready to devour the child, but what we're not told, and what almost no one ever mentions, is that child is taken to the throne. Angels descend and take her child to the throne, this throne of the Ancient of Days where the Lamb of God goes, which is the New Jerusalem. He's taken there immediately. That is our spirit. Our spirit is preserved even in this age when the dragon comes. And then what happens to the woman? She's given wings, and she takes flight. And she goes to a place that has been prepared for her to live in the mountains until the time has come for her to join her son. So the good news is we are in apocalyptic times. That's great. We're being pulled across the threshold. That's wonderful. We have thinking, feeling, and willing being split. That's great because they get bigger as they do, and as long as you can control them, they're a force that becomes a new sense organ in the unseen worlds. So, apocalyptic times, revelation, the unveiling of the soul, it's something that we wanted to tell you. You should welcome.